You see specialty crops generating $30,000 per acre and wonder why massive commercial farms stick with boring corn, soybeans, and wheat. The answer reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about how agricultural wealth actually works. Those high-value specialty crops come with extreme risks, limited insurance options, volatile markets, high labor requirements, and narrow profit windows. Commercial operations choose the seemingly less profitable rotation because they're optimizing for something more valuable than annual returns. They're building wealth through rotational economics, using wheat as a biological investment that pays dividends through improved corn and soybean performance for years afterward. To understand why this strategy dominates commercial agriculture, we need to examine the compelling mathematics that make specialty crops appear so attractive. A specialty crop operation harvesting strawberries generates revenues that make traditional grain farming appear primitive by comparison. The strawberry beds produce substantial gross revenue per acre, while adjacent herb cultivation and microgreen production in controlled environments command premium prices that dwarf the $800 per acre that corn typically generate. These numbers create an apparent revenue advantage that makes specialty crops irresistible to new agricultural entrepreneurs. The mathematics appear compelling at first examination. Specialty crops command premium prices in farmers' markets, restaurants, and organic grocery chains, where consumers willingly pay elevated prices for fresh, locally grown produce. A single acre of basil can yield multiple harvests throughout the growing season, with each harvest generating substantial cash flow. The same acre of land that produces $800 worth of corn could theoretically generate significantly higher specialty crop revenue. The revenue calculations, however, conceal the operational realities that make specialty crops prohibitively expensive to produce at scale. Labor requirements for specialty crops consume approximately 40% of total production costs, compared to 5 to 10% for mechanized grain production. Specialty crop farms averaged $193,250 per farm in labor costs in 2023, representing a 60% increase from 2021 levels. Strawberry harvesting requires teams of workers moving through fields on their hands and knees, selecting only ripe berries while leaving immature fruit for future harvests. Each berry must be individually assessed, picked, and placed in containers without bruising, a process that demands skilled labor during narrow harvest windows. Microgreen production demands even more intensive labor management. Workers must seed trays with precise spacing, monitor germination rates, control temperature and humidity in growing environments, and harvest crops at exact maturity stages using specialized cutting technique. The timing requirements are inflexible. Harvest too early and yields suffer. Harvest too late and quality degrades rapidly, making the entire crop unsaleable. The insurance infrastructure that supports grain crop production simply does not exist for most specialty crops. Federal crop insurance programs cover corn, soybeans, and wheat with established yield histories, standard pricing mechanisms, and predictable loss adjustment procedures. Research shows that 43% of fruit and nut acreage and 47% of vegetable and melon acreage remain uncovered by federal crop insurance program or the non-insured crop disaster assistance program. Specialty crop producers face catastrophic weather events, pest infestations, or market disruptions without comparable safety nets. A single hailstorm can destroy an entire season's investment in strawberry plants, leaving producers with total losses and no insurance compensation. Market volatility creates additional financial exposure that grain crops avoid through commodity futures markets and established supply chains. Specialty crop producers depend on direct marketing relationships with restaurants, farmers markets, and specialty retailers who can cancel orders, reduce quantities, or demand price concessions without contractual obligations. A restaurant closure, supply chain disruption, or competing local producer can eliminate market access overnight, leaving perishable crops with no viable sales outlet. The knowledge requirements for successful specialty crop production far exceed those needed for grain farming. Each specialty crop demands specific expertise regarding planting dates, pest management, harvesting techniques, post-harvest handling, and storage requirements. Grain farmers master 3 primary crops with well-established production protocols, while specialty producers must maintain expertise across dozens of different crops with unique requirements and market specification. Weather sensitivity amplifies these challenges. across all specialty crop categories. Late spring frosts can eliminate strawberry blossoms, excessive rainfall can promote fungal diseases in leafy greens, and drought stress can concentrate flavors to unmarketable levels in herb. Unlike grain crops that can tolerate moderate weather variations and still produce saleable commodities, specialty crops often become total losses under adverse conditions. The financial structure of specialty crop operations creates additional instability through cash flow patterns that concentrate risks during narrow marketing windows. Producers invest heavily in infrastructure, labor, and inputs throughout the growing season, then depend on successful harvests and immediate sales to recover costs and generate profits. Extended harvest periods, storage limitations, and perishability constraints compress revenue generation into brief periods when market conditions, weather events, or logistical problems can eliminate entire seasons of investment. The compelling revenue numbers that attract attention to specialty crops represent gross income before accounting for the operational costs that make these systems economically unsustainable at commercial scale. High revenue without predictable profit margins creates business models that generate impressive top-line numbers while failing to build sustainable wealth over multiple growing seasons. The specialty crop revenue advantage dissolves when analyzed through the lens of risk-adjusted returns, operational complexity, and capital requirements. This reality becomes even more pronounced when examining the fundamental infrastructure requirements that prevent large-scale agricultural operations from simply switching production systems. A 5,000-acre corn operation represents a finely tuned, mechanized system that cannot simply pivot to growing 5,000 acres of lettuce or herbs without complete infrastructure replacement. The logistics challenge begins with equipment incompatibility. Grain operations utilize massive combines, planters, and cultivation equipment designed for standardized row spacing and mechanical harvesting. Specialty crops demand entirely different machinery, storage facilities, and processing infrastructure that costs millions to acquire and maintain. The mechanization gap between grain and specialty crop production creates an insurmountable scaling barrier. Corn harvesters process hundreds of acres per day using GPS-guided combines that operate with minimal human intervention. Lettuce harvesting requires crews of workers moving through fields on specialized platforms, selecting individual heads by hand while evaluating quality, size, and maturity. The same acreage that requires minimal labor in corn production demands substantially more workers for lettuce operations. Equipment investments for specialty crop operations demand capital expenditures that dwarf grain farming requirements. Specialized harvesting machinery for leafy greens includes custom-built platforms with conveyor systems, washing stations, and packaging equipment integrated into field operations. Storage facilities must provide temperature-controlled environments, humidity management, and rapid cooling systems to preserve product quality. Processing infrastructure requires washing lines, packaging machinery, and cold storage warehouses designed for immediate post-harvest handling rather than the bulk storage systems used for grain commodities. The labor mathematics reveal why specialty crops cannot achieve commercial scale efficiency. Grain operations typically employ minimal workers per 100 acres throughout the growing season, relying on mechanized planting, spraying, and harvesting systems. Specialty crop operations require dramatically higher worker counts per 100 acres during harvest period, with additional labor needed for transplanting, cultivation, and quality control activities. Each worker must possess specialized knowledge about crop handling, quality standards, and harvesting techniques that vary significantly between different specialty crops. Supply chain complexity multiplies exponentially with specialty crop acreage expansion. Fresh lettuce requires harvest, washing, packaging, and refrigerated transportation within hours of cutting to maintain quality standards. Cold storage facilities must operate continuously, maintaining precise temperature and humidity conditions throughout the distribution process. Direct market relationships with restaurants, grocery chains, and food service companies require individual negotiations, delivery schedules, and quality specifications that vary by customer and season. The operational complexity increases exponentially as specialty crop acreage expands beyond small-scale production. Managing multiple specialty crops simultaneously requires expertise in different planting schedules, pest management programs, irrigation requirements, and harvest timing across dozens of crop varieties. Each crop demands unique growing protocols, fertilization program, and post-harvest handling procedures that create coordination challenges when scaled across thousands of acres. Transaction costs and coordination challenges multiply when managing diverse specialty crop portfolios compared to standardized grain production. Corn, soybeans, and wheat utilize similar planting equipment, irrigation systems, and storage facilities with minor modifications between crops. Specialty operations must coordinate separate supply chains for seeds, specialized inputs, harvesting crews, and marketing channels for each crop variety. Administrative overhead expands dramatically when managing contracts, quality specifications, and delivery schedules across multiple crops and customers. The cash expense structure of specialty crop farms demonstrates the scalability challenges inherent in labor-intensive production systems. Specialty crop operations averaged over $466,000 in annual cash expenses in 2023, with labor costs alone exceeding $193,250 per farm. These labor requirements include both year-round employees and seasonal workers obtained through specialized visa programs, creating regulatory compliance costs and scheduling uncertainties that grain operations avoid through mechanization. Processing and handling requirements create additional infrastructure demands that grain systems bypass entirely. Specialty crops require immediate washing, sorting, packaging, and temperature management to prevent quality degradation during the brief window between harvest and market delivery. Grain crops can be stored for months in simple bin storage systems, allowing farmers to time sales for optimal pricing without quality concerns. Commercial-scale operations choose operational simplicity and mechanization efficiency over per-acre revenue maximization because complexity costs compound exponentially with scale. The standardized processes, equipment compatibility, and supply chain integration of grain systems allow massive operations to achieve economies of scale that specialty crop systems cannot replicate. Large commercial farms optimize for asset utilization, operational predictability, and management efficiency rather than maximum revenue generation per acre. This optimization framework explains why commercial operations avoid specialty crops, but it raises another compelling question. If grain crops offer such advantages, why not maximize profits by growing only the single most profitable grain crop year after year? Continuous corn cultivation appears to maximize profits by eliminating the apparent drag of lower profit rotation crops. Yet this logic creates a biological time bomb within soil ecosystems that detonates through accumulated pest pressure, nutrient depletion, and microbial imbalances. The soil environment transforms from a diverse biological community into a specialized habitat that favors organisms adapted to the dominant crop. This transformation occurs gradually, making the deterioration nearly invisible until catastrophic losses become unavoidable. Pest populations explode when the same crop provides perfect breeding conditions year after year. Corn rootworm populations multiply exponentially when corn follows corn, as adult beetles deposit eggs in cornfields that hatch perfectly timed to feed on corn roots the following season. Each generation becomes more numerous and better adapted to their preferred host plant. Disease organisms accumulate in crop residue and soil, creating infectious reservoirs that guarantee severe outbreaks in subsequent plantings. Fungal pathogens demonstrate this accumulation effect through massive spore production in infected plant tissue. Each infected corn plant produces millions of spores that overwinter in crop residue, creating enormous inoculum loads for the following corn crop. The pathogen population grows exponentially with each cropping cycle, eventually reaching levels that guarantee economic damage regardless of weather conditions or management practices. Soil degradation accelerates through nutrient mining and physical deterioration that continuous cropping systems cannot prevent. Corn extracts specific nutrients from soil in predictable patterns, depleting potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen reserves faster than natural processes can replenish them. The uniform root architecture of repeated corn crops creates compaction layers at consistent depths, reducing water infiltration and root penetration for future crops. Beneficial microorganisms decline when deprived of diverse root exudates and organic matter inputs that varied crops provide. Soil bacteria communities shift toward compositions that support only the dominant crop, losing the functional diversity that maintains soil health and nutrient cycling efficiency. The herbicide resistance crisis escalates through selection pressure that continuous cropping intensifies. Weed populations exposed to identical herbicide programs year after year develop resistance mechanisms that render chemical control ineffective. These resistant weeds multiply rapidly in the absence of mechanical cultivation or crop competition that rotation systems provide. Resistant weed populations require increasingly expensive herbicide applications using multiple active ingredients, often applied in combinations that damage crop plants and contaminate water resources. Biological diversity functions as catastrophic crop failure insurance through risk distribution across multiple crop species and planting dates. Diverse rotations reduce the probability that weather events, pest outbreaks, or market disruptions will eliminate farm income entirely. Different crops respond differently to drought, flooding, temperature extremes, and disease pressure, creating natural hedges against production disasters that single crop systems cannot provide. Wisconsin's agricultural history provides compelling evidence of monoculture failure. Wheat acreage peaked during the 1860s before disease pressure from continuous cropping made production uneconomical, ultimately forcing farmers to transition toward dairy operations. This historical precedent demonstrates how biological problems compound over time until entire farming systems become unsustainable, requiring complete agricultural transformation. Research quantifies rotation benefits through yield improvements measured across thousands of acres. Corn grain yields increase by 1 to 11% when grown in rotation compared to continuous corn systems. Soybean yields improve by 6 to 12% when rotation breaks pest cycles and improves soil conditions. These percentage improvements translate into substantial economic benefits that offset the apparent disadvantages of including lower profit crops in rotation systems. The hidden costs of monoculture accumulate through soil degradation, pest management expenses, and yield depression that eliminate short-term profit advantages. Continuous cropping creates escalating input costs for fertilizers, pesticides, and soil amendments, while simultaneously reducing crop productivity through biological deterioration. Rotation systems function as biological and economic insurance policies that maintain farm productivity and profitability across multiple growing seasons through ecological balance rather than input intensification. This principle explains why successful commercial operations deliberately include crops that appear unprofitable when analyzed in isolation. Yet these same operations consistently outperform monoculture competitors over time. Understanding this principle reveals why billion-dollar agricultural operations routinely plant wheat, despite its complex financial profile. These sophisticated farming enterprises analyze every input cost and revenue stream with precision, yet deliberately allocate thousands of acres to a crop that often shows modest returns or losses during individual growing seasons. The financial statements frequently show wheat operations consuming substantial resources in seed, fertilizer, fuel, and labor costs that may exceed grain sales revenue, making wheat appear counterproductive when evaluated in isolation. The assumption that every crop in a rotation system must generate individual profits reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how biological systems create value. Commercial farms optimize for total system profitability rather than individual crop returns, recognizing that some components serve supportive roles that enhance overall performance. Wheat functions as biological infrastructure that enables corn and soybean production to achieve higher yields and greater profitability than would occur without this rotational foundation. Wheat's biological architecture transforms soil ecosystems through root systems that penetrate deeper than corn or soybeans, creating channels for water infiltration and nutrient cycling. The fibrous root structure extends throughout the soil profile, breaking up compaction layers that develop under repeated corn and soybean production. These root channels remain active long after wheat harvest, providing pathways for subsequent crop roots to access nutrients and water in lower soil horizons. The timing of wheat growth cycles creates biological disruption that breaks pest reproduction patterns established during corn and soybean production. Corn rootworm beetles deposit eggs in cornfields, expecting corn roots to provide food sources the following spring. When wheat occupies those fields instead, the hatching larvae find no suitable host plants, causing population crashes that reduce pest pressure for years afterward. This biological pest control eliminates the need for expensive soil-applied insecticides that continuous corn systems require. Wheat residue decomposes through different microbial pathways than corn or soybean residue, promoting diverse soil bacterial and fungal communities. The carbon-to-nitrogen ratio in wheat straw supports different decomposer organisms that enhance soil structure formation and nutrient mineralization. These microbial changes persist long after wheat harvest, creating improved growing conditions for subsequent rotation crops. The nitrogen cycling benefits emerge through wheat's unique requirements and contributions to soil fertility systems. Wheat utilizes residual nitrogen remaining from previous crops, preventing nutrient losses through leaching or volatilization. The crop also promotes nitrogen fixation through enhanced populations of free-living soil bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available form. This biological nitrogen contributes to subsequent crop nutrition without additional fertilizer applications. Wheat serves as a biological investment that generates returns through improved performance of other crops rather than direct grain sales. The investment concept recognizes that wheat planting costs create assets in the form of improved soil conditions, reduced pest pressure, and enhanced nutrient cycling that benefit the entire rotation system. These biological assets appreciate over time, generating compound returns through multiple growing seasons. The operational timing advantages of wheat production spread equipment, utilization, and labor requirements across different seasons than corn and soybean production. Wheat planting occurs during fall months, when corn and soybean harvest activities are winding down, utilizing machinery and labor capacity that would otherwise remain idle. Spring wheat harvest happens before corn planting requires intensive field operations, again maximizing equipment efficiency throughout the year. Labor scheduling benefits extend beyond equipment utilization through seasonal workforce management. Wheat production activities occur during periods when corn and soybean operations demand minimal attention, allowing farm managers to maintain year-round employment for skilled workers rather than hiring seasonal labor during concentrated planting and harvest periods. Risk management through crop diversification provides insurance against price volatility that affects corn and soybean markets simultaneously. Wheat prices often move independently of corn and soybean futures, creating natural hedging effects that stabilize farm income across varying market conditions. Weather events that damage corn or soybean crops may benefit wheat production through different growing season requirements and harvest timing. Wheat functions as the biological foundation that makes corn and soybean production more profitable and sustainable through ecosystem services that cannot be purchased with external inputs. The apparent financial disadvantage disappears when wheat's contributions are measured through system-wide performance rather than individual crop accounting. The true economic value emerges when measuring wheat's impact on the crops that follow in rotation. Research demonstrates that corn yields increase by 4.5% when grown following wheat in rotation compared to continuous corn systems. Soybean yields improve by 11% when rotation breaks pest cycles and enhances soil conditions. These percentage improvements appear modest until calculated across the massive acreages that commercial operations manage. Consider the economic impact across a typical 5,000-acre corn operation. A 4.5% yield increase on 200 bushel per acre corn translates to 9 additional bushels per acre. At $5 per bushel, this generates $45 additional revenue per acre before accounting for reduced input costs. Across 5,000 acres, the yield multiplier effect produces $225,000 in additional corn revenue annually. The biological mechanisms driving these yield improvements operate through soil structure transformations that wheat root systems create. Wheat develops extensive fibrous root networks that penetrate deeper into soil profiles than corn or soybean roots, creating channels for water infiltration and nutrient movement. These root channels remain functional long after wheat harvest, providing pathways for subsequent crop roots to access moisture and nutrients in lower soil horizons. Soil aggregation improves dramatically following wheat production through organic matter additions and microbial activity stimulation. The wheat root system releases organic compounds called root exudates that feed beneficial soil bacteria and fungi. These microorganisms produce sticky substances that bind soil particles together, creating stable aggregates that resist compaction and enhance water-holding capacity. Water infiltration rates increase substantially in soils following wheat rotation compared to continuous corn or soybean systems. The improved soil structure allows rainfall to penetrate deeper into soil profiles rather than running off or pooling on compacted surfaces. Enhanced water availability during drought periods provides yield stability that continuous cropping systems cannot match. Beneficial microbial populations flourish under wheat production through diverse root exudate chemistry that supports different bacterial and fungal communities than corn or soybeans provide. Mycorrhizal fungi networks expand dramatically during wheat production, creating symbiotic relationships that enhance nutrient uptake efficiency for subsequent crops. These fungal networks persist in soil for multiple growing seasons, continuing to benefit rotation crops long after wheat harvest. Pest suppression through biological disruption creates substantial yield protection benefits that extend far beyond the immediate post-wheat growing season. Corn rootworm populations collapse when wheat breaks their reproductive cycle, reducing larval pressure on corn roots for multiple subsequent years. The pest suppression effect compounds over time as rootworm populations remain suppressed through continued rotation practices. Soybean cyst nematode populations decline under wheat production because these specialized parasites cannot complete their life cycles without soybean host plants. The nematode suppression persists for several growing seasons, allowing subsequent soybean crops to achieve higher yields with reduced nematode damage. Disease pressure from fungal pathogens also decreases as wheat residue decomposes through different pathways than corn and soybean residue. The compounding effect of rotation benefits extends the yield improvements across multiple growing seasons rather than providing only immediate benefits to the crop following wheat. Soil structure improvements persist for 3 to 5 years after wheat production, continuing to enhance water infiltration and root development for subsequent rotation crops. Microbial community changes remain stable for multiple years, providing ongoing nutrient cycling benefits. Economic calculations reveal how a 4.5% corn yield increase generates $50 to $100 additional profit per acre when input cost reductions are included. The yield improvement reduces per bushel production costs while simultaneously increasing total production, creating leveraged profit increases that exceed the simple revenue calculations. Reduced fertilizer requirements, lower pest management costs, and improved harvest efficiency compound the economic benefits. Biological leverage operates through using one crop to amplify the performance of others rather than maximizing individual crop returns. Wheat functions as a biological catalyst that enhances corn and soybean productivity through ecosystem improvements that cannot be achieved through external inputs alone. The leverage effect creates exponential returns from relatively modest investments in rotation management. The yield multiplier effect transforms wheat from an apparent cost center into a profit amplification system that generates returns measured in thousands of dollars per acre across complete rotation cycles. These multi-year benefits accumulate compound interest through biological processes that traditional single-season accounting methods cannot capture. The mathematics of agricultural success require analytical frameworks that extend far beyond annual cash flow calculations. Financial analysis reveals why successful operations think in decades rather than growing seasons through net present value calculations that measure the true worth of agricultural investments. This concept transforms decision-making by calculating what future benefits are worth in today's dollars, revealing why farms sacrifice immediate profits to build long-term wealth through biological investments that generate returns across multiple decades. Annual thinking drives farmers towards specialty crops and high-value alternatives that maximize single-season returns without considering long-term consequences. This approach treats each growing season as an independent profit center, optimizing for immediate revenue generation rather than sustainable wealth accumulation. The annual perspective ignores biological capital that deteriorates under intensive specialty crop production, creating hidden costs that compound over time. Long-term wealth building operates through entirely different criteria that prioritize asset preservation and compound growth over maximum annual returns. These strategies recognize that agricultural wealth accumulates through biological systems that appreciate in value when properly managed across extended extended time horizons. The fundamental difference lies in treating farmland as a productive asset that generates increasing returns when enhanced through rotation management, rather than merely extracting maximum value each growing season. Selecting crops based on single-year profitability projections fails to capture the multi-year benefits and costs that determine actual farm profitability. Specialty crops may generate impressive annual returns while simultaneously depleting soil organic matter, increasing pest pressure, and reducing future productivity. Grain rotations appear less profitable annually while building soil health, reducing input costs, and enhancing yields for subsequent crops through biological improvements that compound over decades. The compound interest effect operates through biological capital that functions like financial investments, generating increasing returns as soil health accumulates over time. Each percentage point increase in soil organic matter enhances water holding capacity, nutrient retention, and microbial activity that benefits all subsequent crops in rotation systems. These biological improvements compound annually, creating exponential productivity gains that specialty crop systems cannot achieve through external input intensification alone. Small percentage improvements multiply across thousands of acres and multiple growing seasons, creating exponential wealth accumulation that exceeds simple annual return calculations. A 3% annual yield improvement compounds to 26% total improvement over 10 years. When applied across 5,000 acres of corn production, these compounded benefits generate millions of dollars in additional revenue that single-season analysis completely overlooks. Time horizon differences separate specialty crop systems from grain rotation strategies through fundamentally different optimization periods. Specialty crops optimize for immediate returns within single growing seasons, maximizing revenue extraction from current production cycles. Grain rotations optimize across decades, accepting lower annual returns to build biological capital that generates increasing productivity and profitability over extended periods. Real scenarios demonstrate how rotations with lower annual returns generate superior long-term value across extended analysis periods. A rotation system generating $800 annual profit per acre, but building soil organic matter, may achieve higher 20-year value than specialty crops generating higher annual returns while depleting biological capital. The calculation reveals hidden costs and benefits that annual accounting methods fail to capture. Biological capital represents investments in soil health and ecosystem services that generate dividends through improved productivity, reduced input costs, and enhanced resilience across multiple growing seasons. This capital appreciates through rotation management practices that build soil organic matter, enhance microbial diversity, and improve water holding capacity. Unlike financial investments that generate monetary returns, biological capital produces tangible improvements in crop performance that translate directly into increased profitability. Soil organic matter functions like compound interest, with each increment generating increasing returns as biological systems mature and strengthen. The biological improvements create self-reinforcing cycles where enhanced soil health supports greater microbial activity, which produces more organic matter, which further improves soil structure and nutrient cycling capacity. This long-term perspective reveals why apparent short-term losses become wealth builders by quantifying future benefits in present-day terms. Wheat production that shows modest returns annually may generate substantial value when biological benefits to subsequent corn and soybean crops are properly calculated. The most successful agricultural operations recognize that sustainable wealth accumulation requires biological investments that appreciate over extended time horizons. Yet this thinking exposes fundamental flaws in how most farmers evaluate crop profitability. These evaluation methods expose the fundamental flaw in how most agricultural decisions are analyzed. Per-acre revenue comparisons create deceptive simplicity by ignoring the labor intensity differences that fundamentally separate specialty crop production from grain systems. A strawberry operation generating substantial revenue per acre appears dramatically more profitable than corn, yet this calculation excludes the labor requirements that consume the majority of specialty crop revenues. The mathematical comparison treats labor as a negligible factor when it represents the primary cost driver that determines actual profitability. Labor costs consume approximately 40% of specialty crop production expenses compared to 5 to 10% for mechanized grain production. Strawberry operations require hand harvesting crews that move through fields, selecting individual berries at peak ripeness while leaving immature fruit for future harvests. Each berry demands visual inspection, careful removal, and gentle placement into containers without bruising, a process requiring skilled workers during compressed harvest windows. Grain operations utilize GPS-guided combines that harvest hundreds of acres daily with minimal human intervention. The seasonal labor crunch intensifies these cost pressures through massive temporary workforce requirements concentrated into narrow harvest periods. Lettuce operations demand crews of 50 to 100 workers per 100 acres during harvest windows that last only days for each planting. These workers must be recruited, trained, housed, and managed during peak demand periods when agricultural labor markets reach maximum competition. Grain systems spread labor requirements across extended planting and harvest seasons using mechanized equipment operated by permanent employees. Specialty crop production demands skill premiums that elevate hourly wage rates substantially above general agricultural labor costs. Herb harvesting requires workers who understand plant maturity indicators, proper cutting techniques, and post-harvest handling procedures that maintain product quality. Microgreen production involves precise seeding, germination monitoring, and harvest timing that demands specialized knowledge and training. Each crop variety requires specific expertise regarding optimal harvest indicators, handling methods, and quality standards that increase labor training costs. The mechanization gap between grain and specialty crop systems reflects decades of engineering development that revolutionized commodity production while leaving specialty crops dependent on manual labor. Corn harvesters incorporate GPS guidance, yield monitoring, and automated grain handling systems that process crops with mechanical precision. Combine harvesters represent millions of dollars in research and development investments that created efficient mechanical systems for standardized commodity crops. Specialty crops remain largely unaffected by mechanization advances due to biological characteristics that resist automated handling. Fruit and vegetable harvesting requires visual assessment, selective picking, and gentle handling that current robotics technology cannot replicate at commercial speeds. The irregular shapes, varying maturity stages, and delicate structures of specialty crops demand human judgment and dexterity that machines cannot provide economically. Grain crops mature uniformly and tolerate mechanical handling that enables automated processing throughout harvest and storage operations. The scalability problem multiplies exponentially when expanding specialty crop operations across thousands of acres, requiring hundreds or thousands of seasonal workers. Managing large temporary workforces involves recruitment challenges, training programs, housing arrangements, and supervision systems that grain operations avoid through mechanization. Labor shortages during peak harvest periods can eliminate entire crop values when workers cannot be secured at critical timing windows. Regulatory complexity compounds labor costs through compliance requirements that multiply with workforce size. Research demonstrates the escalating burden through lettuce operations, where compliance costs rose from $109 per acre in 2006 to over $1,600 per acre in recent years. Occupational safety regulations, wage and hour laws, housing standards, and worker compensation insurance create administrative overhead that scales with employee numbers. Immigration regulations governing temporary agricultural workers add documentation, processing, and compliance costs that specialty crop operations cannot avoid. Worker compensation insurance premiums reflect injury risks associated with manual harvesting activities that specialty crops require. Hand harvesting operations involve repetitive motions, prolonged bending, and tool usage that create ergonomic hazards and injury exposure. Mechanical grain harvesting concentrates risk among fewer operators using engineered safety systems that reduce insurance costs per acre. Transportation and housing costs for seasonal workers add substantial overhead to specialty crop labor expenses that grain operations avoid. Temporary workers require housing accommodations, meal programs, and transportation services during harvest periods that can add 20 to 30% to direct wage costs. These support services demand additional management attention and capital investments that mechanized grain systems eliminate through reduced workforce requirements. Labor intensity creates an economic ceiling that prevents specialty crops from achieving commercial scale efficiency comparable to mechanized grain systems. The mathematical impossibility of scaling manual labor systems across thousands of acres while maintaining cost competitiveness explains why commercial operations choose mechanization over revenue maximization. This fundamental constraint reveals why the most successful agricultural enterprises focus on entirely different optimization criteria than simple revenue generation. These optimization criteria reveal the fundamental difference between wealth retention and wealth creation strategies that separate sustainable agricultural operations from high-risk ventures. Businesses that generate impressive cash flow operate fundamentally differently from enterprises that build lasting value through capital preservation and systematic growth. High-revenue operations focus on maximizing annual income extraction, while wealth-building systems prioritize asset enhancement and long-term appreciation. Higher revenues create an illusion of prosperity that masks underlying wealth destruction when operational costs, risk exposure, and capital depletion exceed income generation. Specialty crop operations generating substantial annual revenues often consume more capital than they create through soil degradation, infrastructure depreciation, and market volatility exposure. The impressive income statements conceal balance sheet deterioration that undermines long-term financial sustainability. Wealth retention operates through stable, predictable systems that preserve capital while generating consistent returns across multiple economic cycles. These systems minimize risk exposure through diversification, operational simplicity, and asset utilization strategies that maintain value during adverse conditions. Grain rotation systems exemplify wealth retention through biological capital preservation, reduced input costs, and predictable revenue streams that compound over decades. Volatile high-return ventures expose capital to catastrophic losses that can eliminate years of accumulated wealth during single adverse events. Specialty crop operations face complete loss scenarios from weather events, pest outbreaks, or market disruptions that grain systems avoid through crop insurance, futures markets, and biological diversification. The potential for extreme losses outweighs the probability of extreme gains when evaluated across extended time horizons. The generational perspective reveals why family farming operations that survive for decades consistently choose operational stability over short-term profit maximization. Multi-generational farms optimize for business continuity and asset preservation rather than maximizing annual returns that threaten long-term viability. These operations recognize that sustainable wealth accumulation requires systems that can withstand economic downturns, weather extremes, and market volatility while maintaining productive capacity. Risk-adjusted returns reveal the superior performance of grain rotation systems when volatility and capital preservation are properly weighted. Grain operations provide lower but more predictable annual returns with substantially reduced capital at risk compared to specialty crop alternatives. The consistent performance across varying market and weather conditions generates higher risk-adjusted returns than volatile specialty systems with extreme profit and loss potential. Insurance availability and financing terms reflect the financial industry's assessment of risk-adjusted returns across different agricultural systems. Grain operations access comprehensive crop insurance, favorable lending terms, and established futures markets that specialty operations cannot obtain. The financial infrastructure supporting grain systems reduces capital costs and provides risk management tools that enhance overall returns when properly calculated. Asset utilization advantages emerge through grain systems that allow efficient deployment of expensive machinery across massive acreages with minimal operational complexity. Combines, planters, and cultivation equipment operate efficiently across thousands of acres using standardized processes and timing windows that maximize equipment productivity. Equipment depreciation costs decrease dramatically when expensive machinery operates across large acreages using standardized protocols that maximize annual operating hours. Operational leverage amplifies efficiency gains across massive scales through standardized processes that eliminate complexity multiplication. Grain systems achieve exponential efficiency improvements as scale increases, while specialty crop complexity multiplies exponentially with acreage expansion. Management leverage operates through simplified decision-making processes that scale efficiently across large operations without requiring specialized expertise for multiple crop varieties. Wealth retention through stable systems consistently outperforms wealth creation through risky ventures when evaluated across extended time horizons and multiple economic cycles. The mathematical advantage emerges through compound returns on preserved capital versus the boom-bust cycles that characterize high-risk, high-return systems. Individual farm decisions reflect broader patterns that extend far beyond single operations making isolated crop choices. These patterns suggest systematic forces operating across the entire agricultural industry that consistently favor rotation systems despite apparent profit opportunities elsewhere. The collective wisdom of thousands of commercial agricultural operations demonstrates remarkable convergence toward rotation systems despite apparent opportunities in specialty crop markets. This industry-wide behavior pattern emerges from independent decision-making by sophisticated farming enterprises managing hundreds of billions in agricultural assets. Each operation conducts individual analysis of crop profitability, market opportunities, and operational efficiency, yet consistently arrives at similar conclusions favoring grain rotation systems over specialty crop alternatives. Consider whether an entire agricultural industry could systematically overlook obvious profit opportunities that appear evident through surface-level analysis. Thousands of commercial farming operations employ agricultural economists, agronomists, and financial analysts who continuously evaluate crop selection alternatives using sophisticated modeling techniques. These professionals possess intimate knowledge of production costs, market dynamics, and operational requirements across all agricultural sectors, making systematic oversight of profitable opportunities extremely unlikely. Market forces have systematically selected for farming operations using rotation systems through economic pressures that eliminate less efficient alternatives over multiple decades. Farms attempting to maximize short-term profits through specialty crop focus face competitive disadvantages that compound over time through higher operational costs, increased risk exposure, and reduced asset utilization efficiency. The evolutionary process operates like natural selection, where market conditions favor enterprises with sustainable competitive advantages rather than those optimizing for immediate returns. Unsuccessful farming operations exit the industry through bankruptcy, consolidation, or voluntary liquidation when their business models cannot compete effectively across multiple economic cycles. This natural selection process concentrates market share among operations that achieve superior long-term performance through rotation systems, biological capital preservation, and operational efficiency optimization, rather than revenue maximization strategies. Infrastructure advantages emerge through decades of co-evolution between grain handling systems, storage facilities, and transportation networks designed specifically for commodity crop production. Grain elevators, rail transportation, barge systems, and port facilities create massive infrastructure investments optimized for corn, soybean, and wheat handling. This infrastructure provides cost advantages and marketing efficiency that specialty crops cannot access through their fragmented supply chains and limited handling facilities. The grain handling infrastructure operates through standardized protocols, equipment specifications, and quality standards that enable efficient commodity movement from farms to global markets. Specialty crops require individualized handling, storage, and transportation systems that increase costs and limit marketing flexibility compared to standardized grain systems that benefit from economies of scale across infrastructure utilization. Financial system alignment creates fundamental advantages for grain operations through established lending protocols, insurance coverage, and investment frameworks that banks and agricultural lenders understand completely. Commercial lenders evaluate grain operation proposals using proven financial models, established yield histories, and standardized crop insurance coverage that reduces lending risk substantially. Specialty crop operations face higher borrowing costs and reduced credit availability due to increased risk assessment complexity and limited historical performance data. Insurance companies provide comprehensive coverage for grain crops through federal crop insurance programs with established actuarial data, standardized standardized loss adjustment procedures, and predictable claims processing. The insurance infrastructure supporting grain production reduces operational risk and provides financial protection that specialty crop operations cannot obtain at comparable costs or coverage levels. Commodity markets deliver price discovery, liquidity, and risk management tools through futures contracts, options markets, and cash marketing systems designed specifically for grain crops. These markets enable efficient price discovery across global supply and demand conditions while providing risk management tools that specialty crop producers cannot access. The liquidity and transparency of commodity markets reduce marketing costs and provide pricing efficiency that specialized crop markets lack entirely. Forward contracting, basis pricing, and hedging opportunities available through commodity markets allow grain producers to manage price risk and secure favorable marketing terms months before harvest. Specialty crop producers depend on direct marketing relationships with limited price discovery mechanisms and restricted risk management alternatives that increase market exposure substantially. Systemic optimization operates through individual farms making decisions within a larger agricultural ecosystem that has evolved to support grain production efficiency. Each farm optimizes its operations within infrastructure, financial, and market systems specifically designed for grain handling, creating network effects that compound competitive advantages across the entire agricultural supply chain. Transportation costs, storage efficiency, processing capacity, and export infrastructure all favor grain systems through decades of infrastructure development and specialization. Individual farms benefit from these systemic advantages regardless of their operational scale or management sophistication. The agricultural industry deliberately plants crops that lose money annually because the industry has evolved to optimize for system-wide efficiency and long-term sustainability rather than individual crop profitability. The apparent contradiction dissolves when rotation systems are evaluated through biological capital formation, risk-adjusted returns, and multi-decade wealth accumulation rather than annual profit maximization criteria. This reveals something profound about how complex systems actually function when optimization extends far beyond simple profit calculations. The agricultural industry has evolved beyond simple profit maximization to embrace sophisticated systems optimization that prioritizes long-term sustainability over short-term gains. Commercial agriculture represents one of humanity's most sophisticated examples of systems thinking, where apparent inefficiencies serve crucial systematic functions. The boring grain rotation that loses money annually operates as biological infrastructure that enables sustainable wealth creation across decades. This challenges fundamental assumptions about profit maximization versus optimization in complex systems. Optimization recognizes that individual components may sacrifice performance to enhance total system efficiency. Maximization pursues single variable improvement without considering systematic consequences. The agricultural industry demonstrates that feeding billions while building sustainable wealth requires elegant solutions that transcend simple profit calculations. The mundane wheat-corn-soybean rotation may represent agriculture's most sophisticated achievement,